Organizations right now are rushing to launch AI agents, but unfortunately 80% have already seen risky behaviors in pilots. And obviously when these systems scale, these risky behaviors cascade and cascade to create even larger problems down the road. For those who are new here, I've deployed GenAI for some of the world's largest companies, and I've personally seen what failures can happen in production, but also how to avoid them. Now, Agentic AI introduces a different risk profile than traditional GenAI deployments that we were doing even a couple of years ago. And that's because those systems would create a first draft or a recommendation. But with AI agents, they directly take actions. And so this means that when an AI agent makes a mistake, it directly impacts your business. So with this in mind, let's first go through the 3 major risk categories when deploying AI agents. And instead of just listing out every single possible failure mode, what I want to do here is I want to go through how to mitigate risk across your whole AI agent lifecycle. So first, let's go through the 3 broad risk categories that we should be looking at. First is security and access control. And you can really think about AI agents as digital employees, essentially. So they need to have credentials, they'll be triggering APIs, they'll also be moving data around just like how your employees would be doing. And so a lot of the risk categories here are things like unauthorized access, data leaks, or even maybe miscommunication across agents to agents. And so at least on the permission side, you should have least access privilege. And here you only give access to data and tools that the agent actually needs. You can also use IAM for permissions and roles. Now, in terms of more detailed securities and hacks, this is best actually done with a typical security team, and I'd recommend obviously looping that in for more detailed security. Now, security breaches do get the most headlines, and that's obviously important, but I would say the majority of risks that you're going to be facing is typically operational risks, which is really just agents either messing up or doing the wrong tasks day in and day out. And this is also where the ROI of the agent gets directly affected. So some common examples you'll see is chained vulnerabilities, and this is where one flaw in one agent cascades into other agents or downstream steps. And to mitigate this, it might require oversight or some sort of validation throughout this whole process. Resource drain's a big one, where an agent goes into a recursive loop, and then that ends up blowing up runtime costs. Again, this will immediately hit your ROI, things like oversight, maybe dashboards and kill switches to immediately cut that out when you see it. And I'll also put up in this category a systemic problem where some agents you might not be monitoring effectively. And so when there's an issue in the operation, it's hard to catch or hard to fix because you're not actually seeing it appropriately. And going into this, the last category is really governance and data risks here. So when agents are acting without any traceable logs or any sort of visibility, then this does become an obvious compliance risk. And so this is where we need to ensure that agents are following proper compliance guidelines. And this is where monitoring becomes a huge important step throughout this whole process. Now, these are the main risk profiles that you should be looking to mitigate, but let's actually look at where to address these during your agent development cycle. Now, BCG has some good guidelines that I'll also add on with my personal experience here, but let's start with the design phase. Now, during the design phase where we translate those business objectives into actual technical requirements for our teams. And we can actually start looking at mitigating risk even during the design phase. Now, I typically just start with governance and oversight. And here I'd assign a clear owner to each AI agent that is deployed. And so that owner will be in charge of AI outputs and will be used for that human in the loop going forward. Now, just for your awareness, early on this does mean that there's going to be more human oversight, but as the performance improves, then they'll only really be catching edge cases, for instance. Next is risk tiering and autonomy levels. This is where we decide what agents can do completely independently and what actually requires human in the loop. Now, for example, maybe an AI agent can auto purchase anything below $50, but anything above $50 requires a human in the loop. And you can define similar thresholds for data sensitivity or operational impact as well. But now here, if an agent is going outside of its purview, then a human who's going to step in. Next is access and permission controls. Now that we identified what the task is and we know who's going to oversee it, what is the actual data that they should be able to access? And here you should only provide access to tools and data that the agent absolutely needs. And then lastly is these ethical and safety controls as well. So if there's something specific for compliance, then that should be baked in there. But there are also other kind of company ethics that you should be doing as well. As an example, you might have an AI social media agent and make sure that it never talks about politics, for instance. And so even if an agent tries to do that, there will be a permanent block. The next phase is the build phase. This is where we actually start developing the agent and creating it. First is guardrails and technical safeguards. And these are used to validate both inputs coming in and also outputs of the agent. You should also have strict schemas for tool usage, and this is where we could put in kill switches, for instance. Validation testing can look very different depending on the use case, but this is really where we're trying to break the AI agent as much as possible. As an example, for our AI purchasing agent, you could maybe convince the AI to buy something that's $100 by making 2 purchases of $50 each. And so this unfortunately makes it approve purchases outside of the range. And then lastly in this section is monitoring. Like I mentioned before, this is where we have to start really building in our monitoring framework, especially if this is some custom AI application application, you need to really identify what parts the AI agent is doing and then making sure that you're monitoring each step of the process. So this not only helps us in production, but also helps us when we are doing testing and triaging and working with the users. Now, once it passes testing, this is where we implement it into the real world. One is the human oversight and intervention piece. We've already mapped out ahead of time who is responsible for each agent. But this is where we need to put the human in the loop and make employees aware of the AI agent output. And so I talked about maybe a potential dashboard during monitoring frameworks. This could be a cell phone text. But this is to really make sure that employees are aware of the process and can actually do human in the loop effectively. Next is explainability and auditability. So all decisions and rationales should be logged, and then we can reconstruct it to find out why the specific action occurred. And then lastly is the change management and rollout structure of this. Now, obviously in traditional software, you don't want to roll this out to everybody all at once. You should have a structure to change management practice and also a rollout going forward. And this is not only for the direct rollout, but also for any updates in prompts, updates in tools, or any policy changes as well, especially when you get into multi-agent architectures, for instance. You may have to update some agents in other ways, maybe more frequently, where other agents might have their own release cycle. Now, Agentic AI can absolutely help you transform your organization, but it also introduces new risks that traditional software governance didn't really have before. And so as you see here, these risks that I'm mentioning here, not all of them are technical problems, right? But they are still business risks that we need to mitigate. And so the companies that are going to be able to succeed in the future are going to be the ones that are able to really mitigate a lot of these risks going forward. So thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.